Now, I have to say, I came back and I said, what is going on? What's the big deal? So I got a transcript. I reviewed it. I actually went out and reviewed a clip of an answer that I gave. In a key sentence in my remarks, I said the word would instead of wouldn't. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia.
That is never going to get old. President Trump keeps contradicting himself on what he thinks Russia would or wouldn't do, and you saw him there yesterday referring to the transcript to try and lessen the damage he did in Helsinki. Well, the woman whose job it would normally be to produce the actual transcript of what the president said, the White House stenographer, quit because she believed the president lies to the American people. In a New York Times op-ed, she wrote, quote, "It's clear that White House stenographers do not serve his administration, but rather his adversary, the truth." Former White House stenographer Beck Dorey Stein is the author of From the Corner of the Oval, her memoir, and she joins me now. Let's start with, first of all, we never see the White House stenographer, right? This is definitely an army of people who do these things that we don't really know about. What does the White House stenographer do?
So there are actually only 5 of us, and we're these discreet people. We find a corner, and our role is really just to blend into our surroundings and record everything the president says to the press. So in an Oval Office interview, we would go in, we'd put a recorder down on the coffee table, and we'd go across the room and just get to listen to make sure a reporter didn't accidentally misquote the president in the interview. Are
you taking notes as well as the recording that's going on?
We're not even taking notes. We have 2 recorders. We're there, and yeah, we would take notes sometimes, but really those recorders are recording the truth.
So you refer to the stenographer being the first line of defense. The president said, I went back and looked over the transcript, right? That's what someone would do. If somebody accuses you of saying something you believe you didn't say, you either look at the recording or you look at the transcript.
Indeed. And so, yeah, so it would be very easy. Part of why I left is actually because I felt like President Trump wasn't utilizing the stenographers. I felt like there was no respect for our role. And so it was like, why am I here if they're not using us?
Meaning he didn't want the conversations recorded?
He didn't want, it didn't seem like it. We weren't invited to a lot of the interviews in the beginning. And then even on Air Force One, when I flew down to Mar-a-Lago, he had a press gaggle with the entire press pool and didn't tell the stenographer, so I wasn't there for that. So they really weren't using us the way that every previous administration since Reagan was using their White House stenographers.
Let's talk about, because I just had a conversation with Representative Joe Kennedy, one of the people who's saying that the person who was in the meeting, there were 2 other people other than Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump in that meeting. They were translators. Right. Not the same as stenographers, not the official note takers, not the ambassadors who sometimes go into these things, but 2 other humans who know what went on. And this has become a hot discussion because some people are saying we'd like to subpoena these people, or at least the American, and bring it to Congress. That's interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see that happen. Why not? Let's talk to the translator. I mean, any help we can get. It's sad that it's come to this point where we're now asking a translator to do what we have stenographers there to do.
Right.
But sure.
But we didn't have a stenographer in there.
Right.
Look, clearly.
And we were there. I'm sure there was a stenographer there at the ready. There might even have been a stenographer, and they're saying, oh, who knows, because sometimes he doesn't even use the recordings that we have.
So what about the argument that sometimes the president of the United States has business that is so important that it's not for the public to see or hear or for there to be a record of?
What do you mean?
Well, what if we're not supposed to find out what was going on in that meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin because it was really important stuff, because the president was saying to Vladimir Putin, I'm on to you, man. Don't try this stuff.
Oh, I don't think so. I think if that were the case, we would certainly have a transcript, because that would make all of the Republicans in Congress happy and would make their jobs much easier. You know, it's a bad day when I'm actually cheering for Mitch McConnell, because Mitch McConnell is even saying, no, Russia is not our ally and we need to be tougher on Russia.
The readouts that often come out of these meetings, is that based on the recording that the stenographer would have, or is it because somebody else is around there to say, you know, sometimes we don't get transcripts, but we get some sense of this was discussed in the meeting?
Usually there are senior advisors, there are other people in the room, because there's nothing more dangerous. Also, Russia is not our ally, so especially with someone like Vladimir Putin, who, you know, has created all sorts of problems for us right now, of course there would be other people.
So hence your first line of defense, that if you had a stenographer there, you can say, here's our notes.
Exactly.
Show us yours.
Yeah, here's our transcripts, here are our recordings, we have all of these things. The whole idea is we need to protect ourselves first.
What is the difference between the work you did while Barack Obama was in office versus Donald Trump?
It could not have been more different. It was every day we knew exactly what what we were covering. If there was a sudden change in his schedule, we were the first to know about it. We would go to the Oval if there was breaking news, if he had to make a press briefing. We were on the same team as the administration because they valued, hey, we need to stay transparent with the American people. We need to have a transcript of this. We need to have it for the presidential archive, which is beyond any single administration. We were actually hired to be impartial. So the same with George W. Bush. They love the stenographers. George W. Bush used to say, I love the stenos when he was walking out of a room, because it was like, we're there to really protect them, to make sure they're not misquoted.
Vic Storystein, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.